2026 is not just another page on the calendar, and treating it that way could quietly cap your sales success. In this episode of Two Tall Guys Talking Sales, Kevin Lawson and Sean O'Shaughnessy challenge sellers to rethink territory planning, deal mix, and how value selling actually drives revenue generation without adding more hours. They explore why trust, not activity, is the real currency in modern sales management, and how a smarter plan today sets you up to win all of next year. If you want 2026 to outperform 2025, this conversation will change how you approach your sales strategies before the first quarter even begins.
As this episode is being published out to all the podcast players everywhere, we want to thank you for listening to this podcast. It's December as we drop this episode, and 2025 is not the same as 2026 in sales. Now, it may feel like you could pull it off. Like you might say, I can keep doing everything I was doing in 2025 and be successful for 2026. But I would challenge you to think that I need to ramp up 2026 a little bit more than 2025 is. I want to try some new things in 2026 that I did in 2025 because I have a year now to make 2026 be the leader into 2027. And the goal of a great salesperson is to constantly increase your revenue, not increase the hours you work, but increase your revenue year over year and be that much more successful for you, your family, and for your employer. Kevin, it's great to have you on. I said the obvious there, that 2025 is not the same as 2026, but it can feel that way sometimes in sales. So what do you think?
I think, therefore I am. We think about a lot of these things, and the charge to everyone who's a seller or a leader of sellers is to think about, have a mind shift, think about what you should and could be doing. So this for me is very much a mind shift discussion to get us out of thinking about it. 2026 is just another week, just another month, just another day. We've got to shift and think about what is the longer play here. So in a world of sales, you have the need for a microwave and the need for a crock pot all at the same time. So you've got I need to sell something this month, or I need to book something this month, but I also need to make sure that I'm setting myself up to book more in the future. And Sean, I know you'll get into that in the deal makeup kind of discussion here, but I want to charge and encourage all of our sellers listening to this that for us to think about the next year, we have to have that mind shift change about we're not just selling the widget, we're not just selling the product or project, we're selling, this is a currency of trust. And we've got to build into, or we want to build into, what it means to do territory planning under the banner of trust. So if your goal is emotional currency, relationship currency, all the product belief and development currency, that all is the subset of how you build trust in your market. Good products, good sales process, good people is all how you approach a territory plan. So Sean, when I think about people selling in dirt, let's take that, I'm selling the city or this county or this region, selling into a dirt-based territory. So you got boundaries that your peers are not selling into. I like to think about how many times do I need to be in each individual market in that territory. If you're selling farm and garden goods, you're likely not selling them downtown metropolis kind of areas. You may be if there's a big buyer or headquarters of a place that's your target customer, but in large part, you're rural. So you have to be in a lot of different dirt. So how are you structuring your territory to make sure you have good coverage versus someone who is in a high-tech sales industry? Are they focused on the very rural, high-tech space? Or are they in a population dense area? So you're really thinking about, hey, how often can I touch these customers physically? How often can I touch them digitally? And how often can I serve them information about my product or solution digitally? So it's a sales and marketing kind of territory planning. I like to think that if you're only touching a prospect or area once in a quarter, you're probably not going to be successful. You can have too much dirt assigned to you to be successful. Just because you have 9 states doesn't mean you have to call on all 9 states. Your sales manager may tell you, go call on these 9 states. But you, as a seller who has a finite amount of time and a finite amount of resources, has to decide and prioritize, where can I make the most impact? Where can I develop the most pipeline and be fruitful? And at the end of the day, that your sales manager is probably not going to manage you or give you accolades for how many times you touched different customers if you didn't sell them. They only care about the numbers. So figure out territory planning, figure out where you're going to make your numbers. Sean, color in some of those details.
I love this topic because I really like the idea of planning. So I'm going to actually steal 2 quotes. One, I'm pretty sure I know where it came from. The second one, I'm going to talk about 2 quotes. The first one comes from Paul Simon. Paul Simon is this amazing musician, great songwriter, and he wrote a song, and he actually said a line in there that's really important. And in that line of the song, he said, make a new plan, Stan. So it's from 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, and it's the end of the year. It's time to make a new plan, Stan. It really is. And then I'm going to steal one that I'm not sure that Thomas Watson actually said, or at least he came up with originally, and that is, if you fail the plan, then you plan to fail. So it's time to make a new plan, because if you don't plan, you're going to fail. Or at least you're just going to be the extension of 2025. And that's boring. Wouldn't it be great to plan to be great? So just like Kevin just talked about, how am I going to divide my time? What areas of my territory? And the territory could also be, you have 30 named accounts, but the reality is you only need to sell to 10 to make your quota. So maybe you need to figure out which 10 that you're going to double down on. In my career, I've sold primarily IT services and IT software. And I know that when I was young in my career, and definitely when I was a sales manager, when I was coaching other salespeople, I used to talk about, how many deals do you think you need to do next year to make your number? We would take a look at the average size deal for the products that we're selling. We look at what kind of companies bought our product and where we have to spend time. But then how many deals can we do? And the reality was, in our industries, in the industries that I was working on, it wasn't unusual for a customer to do a pilot project or a departmental project before they did a total rollout for everybody in the company. They wanted to pick the marketing department, let them play with it for a while. And if they're successful, then yeah, we're going to roll this product out to everybody in the company. So we used to think about, how many departmental projects or pilot projects do we have to do in the year? We're going to get paid for that. We're going to make money on those deals. But how many of them do we have to do in order to make our number? And you find out it's way too many. And then you got to think about, okay, that means I need to do some bigger than departmental deals, which is going to be an enterprise deal where we are rolling it out to the whole company, and those kinds of opportunities. You have to do the same thing in your market. Maybe you are selling to big companies and small companies. You can spend so much time on small companies and working with them, working with the owner, operator, potentially in those cases. But then you need to spend time on the bigger customer, where we're going to have a buying committee. We're going to have 7 or 8 or 10 people we have to sell to. It's going to take more time to sell those deals. Potentially, hopefully, you're going to have a bigger payout when you go through that process. But you can only do so many of those bigger deals. And if you look at your territory, how many of those small company deals can you do and still make your quota? And can you actually do that? So start thinking about my average size of my deal. How many deals can I physically do? How much work does it take to do a small deal? And figure out, can I even make my quota if I only do small deals? And if you can, great. But if you can't, then you got to think about, okay, now I got to do some amount of these deals in bigger companies or bigger transactions. How am I going to do that? How much work is that going to take in my territory to do that? All of that is that territory planning. That could be regional, that could be named account basis. It doesn't really matter. It's figuring out, how am I going to make my number at the end of the year? And actually, you want to plan on making 20% over your number, just as a hint, because life is better when you're 20% over your number. And then figure out how many deals it takes to do that. And what does that look like? And keep yourself honest. How many am I going to do in Q1? How many am I going to do in Q2? Kind of plan that out to yourself. And then look back in March and then June. How am I doing against that plan? Because your name was Stan and you made a new plan. Kevin, what do you think?
It's not get off the bus, Gus, make a new plan, Stan. No need to be coy, Roy. So I love the songs. It tells the story of life in sales. Music is fun. That's great. But there's an additional, not a side of the coin, but if you spin the prism a little bit, more angles of where this could shine through. So the idea is that for deals, and you talked about enterprise and leading up to enterprise size deals, there's other sellers out here who are selling manufacturing solutions, or they're selling individual consulting services, or they're selling any number of things that it may not equate. So let's think and pivot our thinking just to address the audience here. If you're selling what I'd call a program sale, meaning you're selling into a manufacturing plant, and whether you're selling copy paper or you're selling an input or a throughput like steel for their fabrication so they can make their product, you've got to sell the program, which means you may need to displace one of your competitors or acquire a new customer in your territory. So you've got a strategic accounts map that you need to develop as a part of your territory planning. And when you develop that, it's not, hey, I hope I close them by the end of the year, because closing them by the end of the year is not the goal, because that only gets you to selling your follow-on year volume of sales. You've got to have a plan. Your territory planning is to, how do I activate a new customer relationship in Q1? Because they're not going to make their one-time purchase, because remember, it's a program sale. They're not going to make that one-time purchase in Q1 and not Q2. Because when you're selling program, you've got to sell a little bit in Q1, a little bit in Q2, and 3 and 4 to make your number for growth. So that type of selling requires intentionality. And it's really, for you as sellers in those markets, timing. And Sean, you put out some great articles on your personal LinkedIn post about the coach who never puts on the jersey. You can't be a player coach, and why being a coach only is really important. Your players, you sellers listening to this, are hugely important to be in the game. No potential customer is going to likely do a Google search and find you if they've never met you. If you've never talked about the value you bring, not the product you have, they're going to call someone else when they hit a rock barrier with their current vendor, something like, hey, a vendor's truck broke down, or they're out of stock, or there's something happening on their vendor's ecosystem that doesn't allow them to perform for the customer you're targeting. So that customer needs to know about you. And so your sales strategy in Q1 could just be get noticed. In Q2 could be, hey, become an approved vendor for their supply chain, knowing their paperwork process, their decision criteria for adding new vendors. Because if there's 5 vendors already in that potential customer, it's going to be tough for you to go from number 6 to number 2. So your territory plan needs to be focused on how you access that number 2 spot. Because if you're not there, when they have a supply chain disruption, they're counting dollars in terms of downtime. And that downtime is really expensive for a manufacturer. Think people, assets, production, backlogs, job boards, all those things become really important to the manufacturer. So you, as a salesperson, need to think about how your customers are measuring value in their supply chains and their buying criteria. I'm taking a little time to spend on this program sales because there's a lot of sellers out there that are selling in tier 2 and tier 3 manufacturing operations. They're manufacturers that are supplying other manufacturers with products that will create an end product. And if there's disruptions in that supply chain, you all can imagine what happens. That becomes what they call a bullwhip. So you're short 100 units at tier 3, and those 100 units go in 500 units at the tier 2 supplier, and those 500 units go into 1,000 units at the tier 1 supplier, right? And then you get the ultimate manufacturer. This ripple effect means you end up with an impact of 10, 20, 30,000 units because your customer's short 100 units at their production facility. And you say, wait a minute, Kevin, how is that not a one-to-one relationship? One of your units could be a 1,000-foot spool of wire, and that 1,000 feet may go into 10 units at the tier 2 supplier, right? So that's how we get that multiplier effect. And that becomes really important for you as a seller to talk about impact and value and how you understand how you show up and where you show up with your potential customer. I'm beating that horse pretty hard because we need to start selling on value. This goes back to that mind shift. We've got to stop selling tomorrow just as another day. We've got to get back to selling. We sell value and we create value. So when you're thinking about territory planning, where are you creating value for the market?
That was such a meaningful conversation. One of those moments that make you pause and reflect on how you're approaching the year ahead. I was especially struck by the discussion on program sales and territory planning. It's inspiring to see how success isn't just about closing deals quickly, but about thoughtfully earning your place in the customer's ecosystem over time. Building recognition, becoming an approved vendor, and eventually outshining competitors takes patience, precision, and a compelling value-driven message. These are the qualities that truly distinguish transactional sellers from trusted advisors. Remember, focusing on revenue rather than just activities is key to staying proactive and on track. If you don't write this down now, the busy daily chores might make you forget, and before you know it, half the year is gone. So take a moment today to outline your deal mix, set your targets, and plan out your quarters. Doing this early will help you stay focused and keep your momentum going. And if you ever need help sharpening your sales strategies, improving sales management, or simply growing your company with more confidence, reach out to Sean or Kevin. Their contact information is waiting for you in the show notes. You can also join the B2B Sales Lab, a community built for salespeople and sales leaders who want real answers, practical resources, and support from peers who are serious about making their number. The link to the B2B Sales Lab is in the show notes, and it's well worth your time. We'll be back with you again very soon for another conversation that challenges how you sell and how you lead. Until then, happy selling!